Greetings and salutations. You know what they say, the eighth time is a charm. Can you see me? Can you hear me? Oh, good. I'm seeing some yeses in the chat. That is a relief. Yeah. Terry is writing echo, echo. Do you hear echoes coming from my end? Saying again, and did the sound line up with what you saw? Terry is hearing everything twice. Is anyone else having audio problems? The wonderful thing is I can see how many people are just having a good time in the chat. That's really nice. I love. All right, good. No echo is good. All right. Well, we will proceed as though this were what I had in mind. Yeah, so been saving up donations for months and months and months to improve the video camera, improve the video quality. And if you didn't see in the chat that I posted a few minutes ago, that camera is now magically a little expensive brick. Completely unresponsive whatsoever in any form. But it is obviously still under warranty, being only a couple of days out of the box. So not going to get stressed on that point. And we'll just see how that affects the readings, if at all. Yeah, oh no indeed. It's, one of those things in life that just sort of happens, I suppose. I wish you could see how elaborate the setup has become with all the lights that I have set around to accommodate the new camera. But, I'd say, what are you going to do? But what are you going to do is pretty clear course of action. Going to return the damn camera. Yeah. No, the new camera is worse than a lemon. A lemon I could actually, use to make lemonade. This is just a fucking brick. Yeah, so return it. It's the only course of action. And Wolfgang, on the other hand, is inconvenienced not in the slightest. You'll see it is not disrupting his particular state of zen. So getting started a little bit late, I hope you all stick with us. You won't get a lemon at Toyota of Orange. Jesus, why are car commercials so effective that I actually have the tune that Justin Cook is referring to stuck in my head now, and I don't even watch basic cable, yet somehow this has permeated my reality that I know what you're talking about. Yeah. So, thought we'd do a Christmas Carol tonight. And as it has been observed, for some reason, Charles Dickens elected not to break this up in chapters, units, or sections, but in staves. Not really sure why that noun was chosen, however. In the era defined as literally Dickensian, that's what Charles Dickens goes with. Yeah, Wolfgang is pretty damn comfortable, as are the squirrels out on the balcony. There was an infestation of mange in the Big Bear Lake ecology about 8 years ago, maybe it was 10 years ago, that wiped out all of the gray squirrels, which are the standard, big gray tree squirrels that everybody would just call squirrels. But we've got chipmunks and ground squirrels and nocturnal flying squirrels to make the distinctions of here in our local ecologies. So gray squirrels are like a different critter. And I've been excited to see the first gray squirrel return in almost a decade. And they're getting so used to me going out and intentionally feeding them and washing out and refilling water bowls in the daytime that they are no longer afraid of the door opening, which this guy is really enthused about. Oh my God, they're crunchy, they're chewy, they're big and fluffy, and they just sit there when the door opens. Gimme. So I gotta make sure to physically pick him up when I open the doors in the mornings, because the gray squirrels now know not to fear me, but they don't know that they need fear my little demon companion. All right, enough on local Big Bear ecology. Greetings and salutations. Welcome to Fireside Tales with Wolfgang, Stave 11. I think we're going to start calling these chapters staves. I wanted to open tonight with a little bit of gratitude and thank Ruth Sanchez in the chat for some gifts that she brought to both me and Wolfgang over the weekend. I incorrectly thanked Aunt Patty for some ridiculously cute cat toys that he was obsessed with in the last 24 hours. And one of those cat toys came from Ruth Sanchez, who included a card. Ow! Stop biting me, you beast. I'm just I'm like extolling the virtues of your gentility. And it's... All right. Ruth Sanchez said, "Dear Wolfgang, and meow to your human, that he is loved and appreciated. As sucky as this pandemic is, you have both really embraced the suck. Have fun with your toys and keep being your adorable and confident self. Love, your fan, Josefa Ruth Sanchez Snyder." Thank you very much. He has really been embracing the little catnip mouse penguin critters with Santa hats. And yeah, you. Talking about you. So, Let's. Where is his catnip? Well, is there? It's all around the house. Sometimes he chews it. Sometimes he snorts it. Sometimes he smokes it. But never does he offer to share it with the squirrels. Squirrel lives matter. Stop biting. What the hell is with you? Why are you So this is the weird thing about living with a beast. He'll cuddle you and bite you at the same time. Why? Why would you do that? That doesn't that don't. Yeah. It's as though to say, I love you. Don't forget who's boss. This is A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. Preface. I've endeavored in this ghostly little book to raise the ghost of an idea which shall not put my readers out of humor with themselves, with each other, with the season, or with me. May it haunt their house pleasantly, and no one wish to lay it. Their faithful servant and friend, C.D. Signed in December of 1843. Stave 1. Marley's Ghost. Marley was dead, to begin with. There is no doubt whatever about that. The register of his burial was signed with the clergyman, the clerk, the undertaker, and the chief mourner. Scrooge signed it. Look, I'm going to need my hand to turn pages. Can you... It's not so much that he's holding on, it's that he's holding on with claws. Can I... Yeah, I need that to turn pages. Scrooge signed it. Old Marley was dead as a doornail. Scrooge knew he was dead. Of course he did. How could it be otherwise? Scrooge and he were... How? What the fuck are you biting me for? This is the first F-bomb in any Fireside Tales. Why? Why? Okay, okay. Scratch your ears. Scratch your cheek. Scratch your chin. Do you want to hold my hand? Okay. Old Marley was dead as a doornail. Scrooge knew he was dead. Of course he did. How could it be otherwise? Scrooge and he were partners for I don't know how many years. Scrooge was his sole executor, his sole administrator, his sole friend, and sole mourner. Scrooge never painted out Old Marley's name. There it stood, years afterward, above the warehouse door, Scrooge and Marley. The firm was known as Scrooge and Marley. Sometimes people new to the business called Scrooge Scrooge, and sometimes called him Marley. But he answered to both names. It was all the same to him. Oh, but he was a tight-fisted hand at the grindstone. Scrooge, a squeezing, wrenching, grasping, scraping, clutching, covetous old sinner. Hard and sharp as flint, from which no steel had ever struck out generous fire. Secret and self-contained and solitary as an oyster. The cold within him froze his old features, nipped his pointed nose, shriveled his cheek, stiffened his gait, made his eyes red, his thin lips blue, and spoke out shrewdly in his grating voice. A frosty rime was on his head and on his eyebrows and his wiry chin. He carried his own low temperature always about with him. He iced his coffee in the dog days and didn't thaw it 1 degree at Christmas. Where are you going now? External heat and cold had little influence on Scrooge. No warmth could warm, no wintry weather chill him. Nobody ever stopped him in the street to say, with gladsome look, "My dear Scrooge, how are you? When will you come to see me?" No beggars employed him to bestow a trifle. No children asked him what it was o'clock. No man or woman ever once in all of his life inquired the way to such and such a place of Scrooge. Even the blind men's dogs appeared to know him, and when they saw him coming on, would tug their owners into doorways and up courts, and then would wag their tails as though they said, "No eye is better than an evil eye, dark master." But what did Scrooge care? It was the very thing he liked, to edge his way along the crowded paths of life, warring all human sympathy to keep its distance. That was what the knowing ones called nuts to Scrooge. Upon a time, of all the good days of the year, on Christmas Eve, old Scrooge sat busy in his counting house. It was cold, bleak, biting weather, foggy withal, and he could hear the people in the court outside go wheezing up and down, beating their hands upon their breasts and stamping their feet upon the pavement stones to warm them. The city clocks had only just gone 3, but it was quite dark already. It had not been light all day, and candles were flaring in the windows of the neighboring offices like ruddy smears upon the palpable brown air. The fog came pouring in at every chink and keyhole, and was so dense without that, although the court was of the narrowest, the houses opposite were mere phantoms. To see the dingy cloud come drooping down, obscuring everything, one might have thought that nature lived hard by and was brewing on a large scale. Hey, where'd my co-star go? Well, come back. Come back. The funny thing about sitting here and looking out into an otherwise dark room is all I can see is across the room the cold, glowing eyes of a predator peering back at me from what appears to be underneath the dining room table. Beastly. People on the internet are calling for you. Come here. Come on. Come on. Yes, sir. Yeah, come on. Oh boy, come on. It's a predator that can be lured with cat treats, after all. You want to hang out? Showtime. Pardon me. Wow, Michelle's going to have one hell of a time editing this one. Dreadful etiquette. We apologize. The door of Scrooge's counting house was open that he might keep his eye upon his clerk, who, in a dismal little cell beyond, a sort of tank, was copying letters. Scrooge had a very small fire, but the clerk's fire was so very much smaller that it looked like one coal. But he couldn't replenish it, for Scrooge kept the coal box in his own room, and so surely as the clerk came in with the shovel, the master predicted that it would be necessary for them to part. Wherefore the clerk tried to warm himself at the candle, in which effort Not being a man of strong imagination, he failed. "Merry Christmas, Uncle! God save you!" cried a cheerful voice. It was the voice of Scrooge's nephew, who came in so quickly that this was the first intimation he had of his approach. "Bah!" said Scrooge. "Humbug." He had so heated himself with rapid walking in the fog and frost, this nephew of Scrooge's, that he was all in a glow. His face was ruddy and handsome, his eyes sparkled, his breath smoked again. "Christmas a humbug, Uncle," said Scrooge's nephew. "You didn't mean that, I'm sure." "I do," said Scrooge. "Merry Christmas. What right have you to be merry? What reason have you to be merry? You're poor enough." "Come then," returned the nephew gaily. "What right have you to be dismal? What reason have you to be morose? You're rich enough." Scrooge, having no better answer ready on the spur of the moment, said, "Bah!" again, and followed it up with, "Humbug." "Don't be cross," said the nephew. "What else can I be?" returned the uncle, "when I live in such a world of fools as this? Merry Christmas. Out upon Merry Christmas. What's Christmas? Time to you, but a time for paying bills without money. Time for finding yourself a year older and not an hour richer. A time for balancing your books and having every item in them through around a dozen months presented dead against you. If I could work my will," said Scrooge indignantly, "every idiot who goes on about with Merry Christmas on his lips should be boiled with his own pudding and buried with a stake of holly through his heart. He should." "Uncle," pleaded the nephew. "Nephew," returned the uncle sternly, "keep Christmas in your own way, and let me keep it in mine." "Keep it?" repeated Scrooge's nephew. "But you won't keep it." "Leave me alone, then," said Scrooge. "Much good may it do you, much good it has ever done you." The expression, "like herding cats," immediately comes to mind as Wolfgang has now found the frame exactly this high to sit at immediately under camera. He's poised majestically in a way that no one shall ever see except myself from behind his vantage. Hey, bud, come back to here. Come back to here. Yeah, this is where we can see you. Sometimes I think he regales in being seen. Other times, I think he internally, infuriatingly conflates my joy with his own. Let's not extol the virtues of such expostulation apart from the text. Again, Michelle, who's going to edit this later. Sorry. There are many things from which I might have derived good, by which I have not profited, I dare say, returned the nephew. Christmas among the rest. But I'm sure I have always thought of Christmas time when it has come around, apart from the veneration due to its sacred name and origin, if anything belonging to it can be apart from that, as a good time. Kind of forgiving, charitable, pleasant time. The only time I knew of in the long calendar of the year when men and women seem, by one consent, to open their shut-up hearts freely and to think of people below them as if they really were fellow passengers to the grave, and not of another race of creatures bound on other journeys. And therefore, uncle, though it has never put a scrap of gold or silver in me pocket, I believe that it has done me good and will do me good. And I say, God bless it. The clerk in the tank involuntarily applauded. Becoming immediately sensible of the impropriety, he poked the fire and extinguished the last frail spark forever. Let me hear another sound from you, said Scrooge, and you'll keep your Christmas by losing your situation. You're quite the powerful speaker, sir, he added, turning to his nephew. I wonder you don't go into Parliament. Don't be angry, Uncle. Come, dine with us tomorrow. Scrooge said that he would see him. Yes, indeed he did. He went the whole length of the expression and said that he would see him in that extremity first. But why? Cried Scrooge's nephew. Why? Why did you get married? Said Scrooge. Because I fell in love. Because you fell in love, growled Scrooge, as if that were the only thing in the world more ridiculous than a Merry Christmas. Good afternoon. Nay, Uncle, but you never came to see me before that happened. Why give it as a reason for not coming now? Good afternoon, said Scrooge. I want nothing from you. I ask nothing of you. Why cannot we be friends? Good afternoon, said Scrooge. I'm sorry, with all my heart, to find you so resolute. We have never had any quarrel to which I have been a party, but I have made the trial in homage to Christmas, and I'll keep my Christmas humour to the last. So, Merry Christmas, Uncle. Good afternoon, said Scrooge. And a Happy New Year. Good afternoon, said Scrooge. His nephew left without an angry word, notwithstanding. He stopped at the outer door to bestow the greetings of the season on the clerk, who, cold as he was warmer than Scrooge, for he returned them cordially. There's another fellow, muttered Scrooge, who overheard him. My clerk, with 15 shillings a week and a wife and family, talking about a Merry Christmas. I'll retire to Bedlam. This lunatic, in letting Scrooge's nephew out, had let 2 other people in. They were portly gentlemen, pleasant to behold, and now stood with their hats off in Scrooge's office. They had books and papers in their hands and bowed to him. Scrooge and Marley's, I believe, said one of the gentlemen, referring to his list. Have I the pleasure of addressing Mr. Scrooge or Mr. Marley? Mr. Marley has been dead these 7 years, Scrooge replied. He died 7 years ago this very night. We have no doubt his liberality is well represented by his surviving partner, said the gentleman, presenting his credentials. It certainly was, for they had been 2 kindred spirits. At the ominous word liberality, Scrooge frowned, shook his head, and handed the credentials back. At this festive season of the year, Mr. Scrooge, said the gentleman, taking up a pen, it is more than usually desirable that we should make some slight provision for the poor and destitute who suffer greatly at the present time. Many thousands are in want of common necessaries. Hundreds of thousands are in want of common comfort, sir. Are there no prisons? Asked Scrooge. Plenty of prisons, said the gentleman, laying down the pen again. And the union workhouses, demanded Scrooge. Are they still in operation? They are, still, returned the gentleman. I wish I could say that they were not. The treadmill and the poor law are in full vigor, then, said Scrooge. Both very busy, sir. No. I was afraid, from what you said at first, that something had occurred to stop them in their useful course, said Scrooge. I am very glad to hear it. Under the impression that they scarcely furnish Christian cheer of mind or body to the multitude, returned the gentleman, a few of us are endeavouring to raise a fund to buy the poor some meat and drink and means of warmth. We choose this time because it is a time of all others when want is keenly felt and abundance rejoices. What should I put you down for? Nothing, Scrooge replied. Do you wish to be anonymous? I wish to be left alone, said Scrooge. Since you ask me what I wish, gentlemen, that is my answer. I don't make myself merry at Christmas, and I can't afford to make idle people merry. I help to support the establishments I have mentioned. They cost enough, and those who are badly off must go there. I am a job creator. Many can't go there and would rather die. If they would rather die, said Scrooge, they had better do it and decrease the surplus population. Besides, excuse me, I don't know that. But you might know it, observed the gentleman. It's not my business, Scrooge returned. It's enough for a man to understand his own business and not to interfere with other people's. Mine occupies me constantly. Good afternoon, gentlemen. Meanwhile, the fog and darkness thickened. Foggier yet, and colder. The owner of one scant young nose, gnawed and mumbled by the hungry cold as bones are gnawed by dogs, stooped down at Scrooge's keyhole to regale him with a Christmas carol. But at the first sound of God bless you, merry gentlemen, may nothing you dismay, Scrooge seized the ruler with such energy of action that the singer fled in terror, leaving the keyhole to the fog in even more congenial frost. At length, the hour of shutting up the counting house arrived. With an ill will, Scrooge dismounted from his stool and tacitly admitted the fact to the expectant clerk in the tank, who instantly snuffed his candle out and put on his hat. You'll want all day tomorrow, I suppose, said Scrooge. If it's quite convenient, sir. It's not convenient, said Scrooge, and it's not fair. If I was to stop half a crown for it, you'll think yourself ill-used. I'll be bound. The clerk smiled faintly. And yet, said Scrooge, you don't think me ill-used when I pay a day's wages for no work. The clerk observed that it was only once a year. Poor excuse for picking a man's pocket every 25th of December, said Scrooge. buttoning his greatcoat to the chin. "But I suppose you must have the whole day. Be here all the earlier next morning." The clerk promised that he would, and Scrooge walked out with a growl. Scrooge took his melancholy dinner in his usual melancholy tavern, and having read all the newspapers and beguiled the rest of the evening with his banker's book, went home to bed. He lived in chambers which had once belonged to his deceased partner. They were a gloomy suite of rooms in a lowering pile of building up where it had so little business to be that one could scarcely help fancying it must have run there when it was a young house playing at hide and seek with other houses and forgotten the way out again. It was old enough now, and dreary enough, for nobody lived in it but Scrooge. The other rooms being all let out as offices. The yard was so dark that even Scrooge, who knew its every stone, was fain to grope with his hands. The fog and frost so hung about the black old gateway of the house that it seemed as if the genius of the weather sat in mournful meditation on the threshold. Now, it is fact that there was nothing at all peculiar about the knocker on the door, except that it was very large. It is also a fact that Scrooge hadn't seen it, night and morning, during his whole residence in that place. Also, that Scrooge had as little of what it is called fancy about him as any man in the city of London. Let it also be borne in mind that Scrooge had not bestowed one thought on Marley since his last mention of his 7 years dead partner that afternoon. And then, let any man explain to me, if he can, how it happened that Scrooge, having his key in the lock of the door, saw in the knocker, without its undergoing any intermediate process of change, not a knocker, but Marley's face. Marley's face. It was not in impenetrable shadow, as the other objects in the yard were, but has a dismal light about it, like a bad lobster in a dark cellar. It was not angry or ferocious, but looked at Scrooge as Marley used to look, with ghostly spectacles turned up on its ghostly forehead. The hair was curiously stirred as if by breath or hot air, and though the eyes were wide open, they were perfectly motionless. That, and its livid color, made it horrible, but its horror seemed to be in spite of the face, and beyond its control, rather than a part of its own expression. As Scrooge looked fixedly at this phenomenon, it was a knocker again. To say that he was not startled would be untrue. But he put his hand upon the key that he had formerly relinquished, turned it sturdily, walked in, and he lighted his candle. He did pause, but there was nothing on the back of the door except the screws and nuts that held the knocker on, and so he said, "Puh, puh," and closed it with a bang. The sound resounded through the house like thunder. He fastened the door and walked up the stairs slowly. Up Scrooge went, But before he shut his heavy door, he walked through his rooms to see that all was right. He had just enough recollection of the face to desire to do that. Quite satisfied, he closed his door and locked himself in. Double locked himself in, which was not his custom. Thus, secured against surprise, he took off his cravat, put on his dressing gown and slippers and his nightcap, and sat down before the fire to take his gruel. "Humbug," said Scrooge. His glance happened to rest upon a bell. It was with great astonishment that he saw this bell begin to swing. It swung so softly in the outset that it scarcely made a sound, but soon it rang out loudly. And so did every bell in the house. Scrooge then remembered to have heard that ghosts in haunted houses were described as dragging chains. A cellar door flew open with a booming sound, and then he heard the noise, much louder, on the floors below. Then, coming up the stairs, then coming straight toward his door. "It's humbug still. I won't believe it." His color changed when, without a pause, it came on through the heavy door and passed into the room before his eyes. Upon its coming in, the dying flame leaped up as though it cried, "I know him. Marley's ghost," and fell again. The same face, the very same. A chain he drew was clasped about his middle. It was long and wound about him like a tail, and it was made, for Scrooge observed it closely, of cash boxes, keys, padlocks, ledgers, deeds, heavy purses wrought in steel. His body was transparent, so that Scrooge, observing him and looking through his waistcoat, could see the 2 buttons on his coat behind. Though he looked the phantom through and through, and saw it standing before him, though he felt the chilling influence of its death, cold eyes, and marked the very texture of the folded kerchief bounded round its head and chin, which wrapper he had not observed before, he was still incredulous and fought against his senses. "How now?" said Scrooge, caustic and cold as ever. "What do you want with me?" "Much." Marley's voice, no doubt about it. "Who are you?" "Ask me who I was." "Who were you then?" said Scrooge, raising his voice. "In life, I was your partner, Jacob Marley." Can you sit down?" asked Scrooge, looking doubtfully at him. "I can." "Do it then." The ghost sat down on the opposite side of the fireplace, as if he were quite used to it. "You don't believe in me?" observed the ghost. "I don't," said Scrooge. "What evidence would you have of my reality beyond that of your senses?" "I don't know," said Scrooge. "Why do you doubt your senses?" "Because," said Scrooge, "a little thing affects them. Slight disorder of the stomach make them cheat. You may be an undigested bit of beef, a blot of mustard, a crumb of cheese, a fragment of an underdone potato. There's more of gravy than of grave about you, whatever you are. That's what you are. An old potato. Scrooge was not much in the habit of cracking jokes. The truth is that he tried to be smart as a means of keeping down his terror, for the specter's voice disturbed the very marrow in his bones. The ghost sat perfectly motionless. Its hair and skirts and tassels were still agitated as by the hot vapor from an oven. Humbug! I tell you, humbug! At this, the spirit raised a frightful cry and shook its chain with such a dismal and appalling noise. But how much greater was his horror when the phantom, taking off the bandage round his head, its lower jaw dropped down upon its breast. Scrooge fell upon his knees and clasped his hands before his face. "Mercy!" he said, "dreadful apparition, why do you trouble me?" "Man of the worldly mind," replied the ghost, "do you believe in me or not?" "I do," said Scrooge. "I must. But why do spirits walk the earth, and why do they come to me?" "It is required of every man," the ghost returned, "that the spirit within him should walk abroad amongst his fellow men and travel far and wide, and if that spirit goes not forth in life, it is condemned to do so after death. It's doomed to wander through the world, oh woe is me, and witness what it cannot share, but might have shared on earth, and turns to happiness." Again, the specter raised a cry and shook its chain and wrung its shadowy hands. "You are fettered," said Scrooge, trembling. "Tell me why." "I wear the chain I forged in life," replied the ghost. "I made it link by link, and yard by yard. I girded it on of my own free will, and of my own free will I wore it. Is its pattern strange to you?" Scrooge trembled more and more. "Or would you know," pursued the ghost, "the weight and length of the strong coil you bear yourself? It was full and heavy, and as long as this 7 Christmas Eves ago, you have labored on it since. It's a ponderous chain." Scrooge glanced about him, but could see nothing. "Jacob," he said imploringly. "Oh, Jacob Marley, tell me more. Speak comfort to me, Jacob." "I have none," the ghost replied. "I cannot rest. I cannot stay. I cannot linger anywhere. My spirit never walked beyond our counting house. Mark me, in life my spirit never roved beyond the narrow limits of our money-changing hold, and weary journeys lie yet before me." 7 years dead, mused Scrooge. "Traveling all the time?" "The whole time," said the ghost. "No rest, no peace, incessant torture of remorse." "You travel fast?" said Scrooge. On the wings of the wind, replied the ghost. You might have got over a great quantity of ground in 7 years, said Scrooge. The ghost, on hearing this, set up another cry and clanked its chain so hideously in the dead silence of the night. O captive bound and double ironed, not to know that any Christian spirit, working kindly in its little sphere, will find its mortal life too short for its vast means of usefulness, not to know that no space of regret can make amends for one's life, so opportunities misused. Yet such was I. Such was I. But you were always such a good man of business, Jacob, faltered Scrooge, who now began to apply this to himself. Business, cried the ghost, wringing his hands again. Mankind was my business. The common welfare was my business. Charity, mercy, forbearance, benevolence were all my business. It held up its chain at arm's length and flung it heavily upon the ground again. At this time of the rolling year, the spectre said, I suffer the most. Hear me, cried the ghost. My time is nearly gone. I will, said Scrooge. But don't be hard upon me, Jacob. I have sat invisible beside you many and many a day. I am here tonight to warn you that you have yet a chance and hope of escaping my fate. A chance and a hope, Ebenezer. You're always a good friend to me, said Scrooge. Thank you so kindly. You will be haunted, resumed the ghost, by 3 spirits. Is that the chance you mentioned, Jacob? He demanded in a faltering voice. It is. I think I'd rather not, said Scrooge. Without their visits, said the ghost, you cannot hope to shun the path I tread. Expect the first tomorrow, when the bell tolls 1. Couldn't I take them all at once and have it over with, Jacob? Hinted Scrooge. Expect the second on the night following at the same hour. The third upon the next night, when the last stroke of 12 has ceased to vibrate. Look to see me no more, and look for that, for your own sake. You remember what has passed between us. When it had said these words, the spectre took its wrapper from the table and bound it round its head as before. Scrooge ventured to raise his eyes again and found his supernatural visitor comforting him in an erect attitude with its chain wound over and about its arm. The apparition walked backward from him, and at every step it took, the window raised itself a little, so that when the spectre reached it, it was wide open. It beckoned Scrooge to approach. When it did, when they were within 2 paces of each other, Marley's ghost held up its hand, warning him to come no nearer. Scrooge stopped. Scrooge followed to the window. Desperate in his curiosity, he looked out. The air was filled with phantoms, wandering hither and thither in restless haste, and moaning as they went. Every one of them wore chains like Marley's ghost. None were free. Many had personally been known to Scrooge in their lives. These creatures faded into mist, and the night became as it had been when he walked home. Scrooge closed the window. He tried to say humbug, but stopped at the first syllable, went straight to bed without undressing, and fell asleep upon the instant. Stave 2. The first of the three spirits. When Scrooge awoke, it was so dark that he listened for the hour. To his great astonishment, 12. It was past 2 when he went to bed. The clock was wrong. An icicle must have got into the works. 12. Why, it isn't possible, said Scrooge, that I can have slept through a whole day and far into another night. It isn't possible that anything has happened to the sun, that this is 12 at noon. He was obliged to rub the frost off with the sleeve of his dressing gown. It was still very foggy and extremely cold, and no noise of people running to and fro making a great stir, as there was unquestionably would have been if night had been beaten off bright day and had taken possession of the world. There was a great relief. Scrooge went to bed again and thought it over. The more he thought, the more perplexed he was. Marley's ghost bothered him exceedingly. Was it a dream or not? Scrooge lay in this state until the chime had gone 3/4 more, when he remembered on a sudden that the ghost had warned him of a visitation when the bell tolled 1. Ding dong. The hour itself, said Scrooge triumphantly. Nothing else. He spoke before the hour bell sounded, which it now did with a deep, dull, hollow, melancholy 1. Light flashed up in the room upon the instant, and the curtains of his bed were drawn. The curtains of his bed drawn aside by a hand, and Scrooge found himself face to face with the unearthly visitor who drew them. It was a strange figure, like a child, yet not so like a child as like an old man. Its hair was white, as if with age, yet the face had not a wrinkle in it, and the tenderest bloom was on the skin. The arms were very long and muscular, the hands the same, as if its hold were of uncommon strength. Its legs and feet, most delicately formed, were bare. It wore a tunic of the purest white, and round its waist was bound a lustrous belt, the sheen of which was beautiful. It held a branch of fresh green holly in its hand, and had its dress trimmed with summer flowers. But the strangest thing about it was that from the crown of its head there sprang a bright, clear jet of light, by which all this was visible, and a great extinguisher for a cap, which it now held under its arm. "Are you the spirit, sir, whose coming was foretold to me?" asked Scrooge. "I am." The voice was soft and gentle. Who and what are you?" Scrooge demanded. "I am the ghost of Christmas past." "Long past?" inquired Scrooge, observant of its dwarfish stature. "No, you are past." Scrooge then made bold to inquire what business brought him there. "Your welfare," said the ghost. It put out its strong hand as it spoke and clasped him gently by the arm. "Rise and walk with me." "I am mortal," Scrooge remonstrated, "and liable to fall." "Bear but a touch of my hand there," said the spirit, laying it upon his heart, "and you shall be upheld in more than just this." The darkness and the mist had vanished, for it was a clear, cold winter day with snow upon the ground. "Good heaven!" said Scrooge, clasping his hands together as he looked about him. "I was bred in this place. I was a boy here." "Your lip is trembling," said the ghost. "And what is that upon your cheek?" Scrooge muttered, with an unusual catching in his voice, that it was a pimple, and then begged the ghost to lead him where he would. "Do you recollect the way?" inquired the spirit. "Remember it!" cried Scrooge with fervor. "I could walk it blindfold." "Strange to have forgotten it for so many years," observed the ghost. "Let us go on." They walked along the road, Scrooge recognizing every gate and post and tree, until a little market town appeared in the distance with its bridge, its church, and winding river. "These are but shadows of the things that have been," said the ghost. "They have no consciousness of us." The travelers came on, and as they came, Scrooge knew and named every single passer-by. Why was he rejoiced beyond bounds to see them? Why was he filled with the gladness when he heard them give each other Merry Christmas? What was Merry Christmas to Scrooge? What good had it ever done him? The school is not quite deserted," said the ghost. "A solitary child, neglected by his friends, is left there still." Scrooge said he knew it, and he sobbed. They went to a door at the back of the house. It opened before him and disclosed a long, bare, melancholy room. A lonely boy was reading near a feeble fire, and Scrooge wept to see his poor, forgotten self as he had used to be. "Poor boy. I wish," Scrooge muttered, after drying his eyes with his cuff. "But it's too late now. "What is the matter?" said the spirit. "Nothing," said Scrooge. "Nothing. There was a boy singing a Christmas carol at my door last night. I should like to have given him something, that's all." The ghost smiled thoughtfully and waved its hand, saying, as it did so, "Let us see another Christmas." Scrooge's former self grew larger at the words, and the room became a little darker. And there he was, alone again, when all the other boys had gone home for the jolly holidays. But he was not reading now, but walking up and down, disparagingly. Scrooge looked toward the door. It opened, and a little girl, much younger than the boy, came darting in and put her arms about his neck, and kissing him, addressed him as her dear brother. "I've come to bring you home, dear brother," said the child, clasping her tiny hands and bending down to laugh. "To bring you home, home." "Home, little fawn?" returned the boy. "Yes," said the child, brimful of glee. "Home for good and all. Father's so much kinder than he used to be. He spoke so gently to me one dear night that I was not afraid to ask him once more if you might come home. And he said, yes, you should. And he sent me in a coach to bring you. And you're to be a man," said the child, opening her eyes, "and are never to come back here. But first, we're all to be together at the Christmas, all Christmas long, and to have the merriest time in the world." "You're quite a little woman, little fawn," exclaimed the boy. "Always a delicate creature, whom a breath might have withered," said the ghost. "But she had such a large heart." "So she had," replied Scrooge. "She died a woman," said the ghost, "and had, as I think, children." One child," Scrooge returned quite litigiously. "True," said the ghost. "Your nephew." Scrooge seemed uneasy in his mind and answered briefly, "Yes." Although they had but that moment left the school behind them, they were now in the busy thoroughfares of a city. It was made plain enough by the dressing of the shops that here, too, it was Christmas time again, but it was evening, and the streets were lighted up. The ghost stopped at a certain warehouse door, and Scrooge asked if he knew it. "Knew it," said Scrooge. "Wasn't I apprenticed here?" They went in. At the sight of an old gentleman in a Scottish wig sitting behind a high desk, as though he had been 2 inches taller and would have almost knocked his head against the ceiling, Scrooge cried in great excitement, "Why, it's old Fezziwig! Bless his heart! It's Fezziwig alive again!" Old Fezziwig laid down his pen and looked up at the clock, which pointed to the hour of 7. He rubbed his hands against his capacious waistcoat, laughed all over himself, and cried out in a comfortable, oily, rich, fat, jovial voice, "Yo-ho there, Ebenezer! Ebenezer Scrooge!" Scrooge's former self, now grown into a young man, came briskly in, accompanied by his fellow prentice. Yo-ho, my boys, said Fezziwig. No more work tonight. Christmas Eve, Richard. Christmas, Ebenezer. Let's have the shutters up, cried old Fezziwig, with a sharp clap of his hands. Before a man can say Jack Robinson. You wouldn't believe how these two fellows went at it. Clear away, there was nothing that they would not have cleared away with, or couldn't have cleared away with the old Fezziwig looking on. It was done in a minute, and the warehouse was as snug and warm and dry and bright as a ballroom as you could desire to see upon a winter's night. In came a fiddler with a music book, and in came Mrs. Fezziwig. One vast, substantial smile. In came the three Miss Fezziwigs, beaming and lovable, his daughters. In came the 6 young followers whose hearts they broke. In came all the young men and women employed in the business. In they all came, one after another. Old Fezziwig clapped his hands to stop the dance, cried out, "Well done, then! Yes, aye, lads, keep a-playing." And there were more dances. There was cake. There was a great piece of cold roast. There were mince pies and plenty of beer. Then old Fezziwig stood out to dance with Mrs. Fezziwig. Top couple, too. People who would dance and had no notion of walking. When the clock struck 11, this domestic ball broke up. Mr. and Mrs. Fezziwig took their stations, one on either side of the door, shaking hands with every person as he or she went out, wished him or her a great Merry Christmas to all. During the whole of this time, Scrooge had acted like a man out of his wits. His heart and soul were in the scene with his former self. It was not till now that he remembered the ghost and became conscious that it was looking full upon him, while the light upon its head burnt very clear. "A small matter," said the ghost, "to make these silly folks so full of gratitude." "Small," echoed Scrooge. The spirit signed to him to listen to the 2 apprentices who were pouring out their hearts in praise of Fezziwig, and when he had done so, said, "Why is it not? He has spent but a few pounds of your mortal money, 3, 4, perhaps. Is that so much that he deserves this praise?" "It isn't that," said Scrooge, heated by the remark and speaking unconsciously like his former, not his latter, self. "It isn't that, Spirit. He has the power to render us happy or unhappy, to make our service light or burdensome. The happiness he gives is quite as great as if it cost a fortune." He felt the spirit's glance, and he stopped. "What is the matter?" asked the ghost. "Nothing particular," said Scrooge. "Something, I think," the ghost insisted. "No," said Scrooge. "No. I should like to be able to say a word or two to my clerk just now. That's all." His former self turned down the lamps as he gave utterance to the wish, and Scrooge and the ghost again stood side by side in the open air. "My time grows short," observed the spirit. "Quick, Scrooge was not alone, but sat by the fire of a fair young girl, in whose eyes there were tears. "It matters little," she said softly. "To you, very little. Another idol has displaced me, and if it can cheer and comfort you in time to come as I would have tried to do, I have no just cause to grieve." "What idol has displaced you?" he rejoined. "A golden one," he said. "There is nothing on which the world is so hard as poverty." "You fear the world too much," she answered gently. "I have seen your nobler aspirations fall off one by one until the master passion, gain, engrosses you, have I not?" "What then?" he retorted. "Even if I have grown so much wiser, what then? I'm not changed toward you." She shook her head. "Am I?" "Our contract is an old one. It was made when we were both poor and content to be so. You were changed. When it was made, you were another man." "I was a boy," he said impatiently. "Tell me, would you seek me out and try to win me now?" No. I release you. With a full heart, for the love of him you once were. You may have a pain in this, a very, very brief time. May you be happy in the life you have chosen." She left him, and they parted. "Spirit," said Scrooge, "show me no more. Conduct me home. Why do you delight to torture me?" "One shadow more," decried the ghost. They were in another scene in place, a room not very large or handsome, but full of comfort. Near to the winter fire sat a beautiful young girl, so like the last that Scrooge believed it was the same, until he saw Belle, now a comely matron, sitting opposite her daughter. But now a knocking at the door was heard, and such a rush immediately ensued that she, with a laughing face, was borne towards it, just in time to greet the father, who came laden with Christmas toys and presents. "Belle," said the husband, turning to his wife with a smile, "I saw an old friend of yours this afternoon." "Who was it?" "Guess." "How can I? Tut, don't I know?" she added, in the same breath, laughing as he laughed. "Mr. Scrooge. I passed his office window. He had a candle inside. I could scarcely help seeing him. His partner lies upon the point of death, I hear. And there he sat alone. Quite alone in the world, I do believe." "Spirit," said Scrooge in a broken voice, "remove me from this place." "I told you. These were the shadows of the things that have been," said the ghost. "That they are what they are. Do not blame me." "Remove me," Scrooge exclaimed. "I cannot bear it. Leave me! Take me back! Haunt me no longer!" The ghost, with no visible resistance on its own part, was undisturbed by any effort. Scrooge seized the extinguisher cap and by a sudden action pressed it down upon its head. He was conscious of being exhausted and overcome by an irresistible drowsiness and, further, of being in his own bedroom. He gave the pat a parting squeeze in which his hand relaxed and had barely time to reel to the bed before he sank into a heavy sleep. This concludes the first half of A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. Join us next week for the remaining ghosts. Also, as always, of course, please join us Thursday night for more music as Lovecast 35 will continue at 6 o'clock. As always, I will leave you now to grant farewells to each other in the chat. It is, as always, my favorite part of this, to see the community that grows up around coming to this same time and place and watching the new form bounds. I love you all. Take care of each other. I'll see you Thursday. a second. I got to turn things off. Yeah.